June 19th, 2024, Kim Il-sung Square in Pyongyang. Tens of thousands of people are here for a perfectly orchestrated celebration. But this gigantic display isn't just for Supreme Leader Kim Jong Un. It's a welcome party for this man, Vladimir Putin. The Russian president was in North Korea to sign this. Договор о всеобъемлющем стратегическом партнерстве. A comprehensive strategic partnership binding the two countries closer than at any time since the Cold War. But this unsettling alliance was forged well before Putin's jet touched down in Pyongyang. We are going to trace a trail of arms, oil and blood that reveals exactly how Russia and North Korea are conspiring to conquer Ukraine, strengthen their militaries, and break the West's hold on global politics in this episode of Photo Evidence. We already have plenty of evidence that Russian forces are using all manner of North Korean weapons to batter Ukraine. This image, shared by a Russian military blogging channel in November 2024, shows North Korean Koksan 170mm howitzers heading west through Krasnoyarsk in central Russia. This picture shows a haul of 240mm rockets and Pyongyang's version of Soviet-era 9M113 anti-tank missiles that were seized from Russian positions by Ukrainian soldiers in October 2024. And these are the remnants of a Hwasong-11A, also known as a KN-23, a ballistic missile that failed to detonate upon landing in Ukraine in January 2024. These missiles can hit targets up to 700 kilometers away from their launch site. But to ensure Putin's troops can keep up their assault on Ukraine, the arms have to get to Russia in the first place. Here's how they do it. This is a satellite image taken on 3rd of September 2023 of the Russian cargo ship, the Angara. But it's not docked in Russia. It's docked in North Korea, at the northeastern port of Rajin, and it's loading hundreds of shipping containers stuffed with artillery shells and rockets. Angara is one of 4 sanctioned Russian vessels making return journeys between Rajin and the Russian ports of Dunai and Vostochny, like clockwork for the past 2 years. Between August 2023 and April 2025, these ships made at least 64 return trips, according to satellite images analysed by the Open Source Center. This image, taken on October the 27th, 2024, shows Angara coming in to Vostochny port. By counting the visible containers on the deck, and also analysing the shadows cast, we can estimate it's carrying a whopping 392 containers of artillery shells. Taking into account the number of trips made and the cargo capacity of all 4 vessels, the OSC estimates Pyongyang could be providing almost 280,000 artillery shells and rockets to Russia every single month. That is 5.6 million rounds in less than 2 years. However, getting the ammo to Russia is just the beginning. Then it has to get to the front lines. This sat photo shows another Russian ship, the Lady R, unloading its cargo in Vostochny port on April 3rd, 2024. A week later, the containers were being loaded onto trains in the vast industrial city and transport hub of Nakhodka, just up the coast from Vostochny. And on May the 2nd, a satellite spotted them being wheeled into the Staraya Toropa ammo depot in Tarapets. Here is a zoomed-in version of this satellite photo showing the containers being put into the ammo depot. Staraya Toropa is more than 6,500 kilometers away from Nakhodka, but less than 500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Staraya Toropa is one of many depots in Western Russia that received North Korean arms destined for use in Ukraine. Another primary destination for Pyongyang shells was the 719th Artillery Ammunition Facility here, on the outskirts of Tikharetsk. This is a close-up image showing the containers being wheeled into the depots. That was until September 2024, when Ukraine damaged many of the warehouses in a massive strike. Nevertheless, if Russia's forces went to battle without North Korean ammo, the battlefield in Ukraine would look very different.
Artillery is the backbone of Russia's war in Ukraine, so much so that its army is often described as an artillery army with a lot of tanks. The method is simple but brutal. Use heavy armour like T-72 and T-80 tanks, and infantry fighting vehicles like the BMP-3, as well as minefields to channel an enemy, in this case Ukraine, into what the Russians call a fire sack. These vehicles carry heavy armour at the front, which enables them to withstand a lot of punishment and bring artillery fire to bear more effectively. Once trapped, the enemy is pounded by artillery fire, supported by helicopters, jets, and even drones. Weapons like this, the 152mm Gyatsin howitzer, seen in action during Russia's assault on Donetsk in 2022, or even this, an aging M46 130mm towed gun, seen here on the front line in January 2024, are central to Russia's offensive. Artillery defeated Ukraine's counter-offensive in 2023. It enabled Russian troops to seize key cities like Avdiivka in 2024 and helped to suppress Ukrainian raids into Russian-held territory. These guns fire large shells filled with 7 kilos of high explosives. When they detonate, they shower the surrounding area with fragments, causing concussions and trauma to the organs. These weapons suppress and terrorize Ukrainian soldiers. They're not very accurate. A weapon like this, the M46, will produce a cigar-shaped beaten zone. The shells don't land where they want, they land within this area. This means that Putin's forces must fire huge volumes of shells to succeed. These pictures, taken on February 15, 2024, show Avdiivka after it was subjected to Russia's artillery tactics. You can clearly see here how every scrap of land is pockmarked with craters. Most of the buildings have been demolished or severely damaged. Ironically, inaccuracy adds to artillery's effectiveness. Relentless barrages force Ukrainian soldiers to retreat or take cover, perhaps along the side of a road here, or in the basements of these buildings, or, very often, within large industrial plants like this one. The basements and trenches provide them with cover and protection from the overpressure of the Russian artillery. This is why these cities end up getting destroyed, because the Ukrainians take cover and there is no way for the Russians to get them without risking heavy casualties. A study published in August 2023 revealed artillery and rocket fire caused 70% of Ukraine's casualties since February 2022. But for this approach to work, Russia must maintain a high rate of fire, and that's where North Korea comes in. These images, taken from a Russian state TV report from Luhansk broadcast on Christmas Day 2023, show soldiers loading what appear to be North Korean artillery shells into their guns. You can see here the large 152mm shell body with this copper band which helps it spin through the barrel. Each one consists of this full piece of metal that you see here. This is the lethal bit, full of explosive and steel or iron. Behind it comes a brass case filled with propellant. North Korea has supplied this too, as Russia has been facing shortages of the key raw material, nitrocellulose. Between October 2023 and April 2025, Russia is estimated to have fired 14.2 million artillery rounds. These 152mm rounds are among the most widely used. Based on what we know about the volume of its arms shipments, North Korea has likely provided somewhere between 25 and 40% of those rounds. But Kim Jong Un was willing to go one step further, backing up his firepower with manpower.
These photos, shared by Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, show what Kiev claims are 2 North Korean soldiers. In January 2025, they were taken prisoner by Ukrainian special forces operating in Russia's Kursk region, where Kiev troops had launched an incursion in summer 2024. This is a map of the Russia-Ukraine theatre on January 21st, 2025. As you can see, almost 20% of Ukrainian territory was under Russian control, but Kiev's troops still held a small chunk of land here, across the border in Kursk. This land would have been a bargaining chip in ceasefire talks. But for Moscow, relinquishing territory in Kursk, the site of the revered victory of the Soviet Red Army against the Nazis in World War II, was intolerable. So, the Kremlin called on its Korean ally to pile more bodies into the front. But they were woefully underprepared. could not communicate with their Russian commanders, and had never seen modern warfare. Drone footage, released by Ukraine's armed forces, appeared to show terrified Korean soldiers on freezing battlefields moments before being blown up. Other images, consistent with various battlefield reports, appeared to show Russian soldiers deliberately disfiguring the faces of the dead to obscure their origin as the death toll mounted. Ukrainian troops even managed to recover the bodies of several North Korean soldiers. Some, like this man, carried apparently forged Russian military ID cards. This document gives his name as Kan Bolat Albertovich Kim. It also claims he was born in the Russian Republic of Tver, near Mongolia, but the document is signed in Korean with the name Ri Dae-hyuk. Here's another ID, carried by one of the prisoners we saw earlier. This one carries the name Aitorin Aranzin, also from Tver, but it was left unsigned. Other soldiers were found with diaries. These pages reportedly belonged to a North Korean fighter killed in December 2024. This one details his longing for home and the warm embrace of my dear father and mother. It also mentions celebrating the birthday of one of his comrades, who is almost certain to have died alongside him. This one here shows the soldier's hastily scrawled notes on how to tackle drone warfare. He writes how one soldier must act as bait to try and lure the drone away, while two others prepare to shoot it down. But despite all of this evidence, many people refuse to believe that North Korean soldiers were in fact operating on the front line, dismissing it as Ukrainian and US propaganda. Those denials fell silent on April 28, 2025, when the Kremlin issued this presidential statement, openly acknowledging that North Korean troops had indeed fought in Kursk. The statement read, "We pay tribute to the heroism, high level of special training, and dedication of the Korean soldiers, who, shoulder to shoulder with Russian fighters, defended our motherland as their own." Then, on June 30th, 2025, North Korea's state news agency, KCNA, released these images. These are photographs of a performance by Russian and North Korean dancers and performers in Pyongyang, part of which was dedicated to the fallen soldiers in Kursk. On the screen above, a video plays, showing Kim resting his hands on the repatriated coffins of his troops, draped in the national flag. Watching from the audience, Kim also shed some tears for the camera. Clearly then, North Korea's support has been instrumental in propping up the Russian war machine in Ukraine and the defense of Kursk. But this is not a one-way street. For every shell fired and drop of Korean blood spilt, Kim reaps his own rewards.
This satellite image, taken on May the 18th, 2024, shows the North Korean vessel Yuson docking at Russia's Vostochny port. Pay attention to this shape here. You can see from this zoomed image that this is the Yuson and the infrastructure of the port. We've already established that Vostochny is a key entry point for North Korean arms flowing into Russia. But it's also where Kim Jong Un gets what he craves in return: oil. Here's an image of a berth at Vostochny, linked to an oil terminal operated by Russia's Toplivo bunkering company. Again, pay attention to the shape. You can clearly see that the Yuson is docked at this exact terminal in Vostochny, ready to load up with hundreds of thousands of barrels of black gold. Weeks later, on June the 6th, 2024, the Yuson was seen docked in Nampo, North Korea's largest commercial port, offloading its oil into new storage facilities. Throughout 2024, more than 10 North Korean tankers made return trips from Vostochny to North Korean ports, carrying hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil each. Oil is Kim's lifeline. North Korea has no domestic reserves, so its defense industry and much of its economy depend entirely on imports. Back in 2006, the UN Security Council, with Russia's help, passed Resolution 1718. This compelled members to block transfers of technology that could advance Pyongyang's nuclear program. It also banned the export of luxury goods to North Korea to try and undermine support for Kim's regime. Then, in 2017, Russia also voted in favour of Resolution 2375. This imposed an oil import cap on North Korea of just 2 million barrels per year in an attempt to limit Pyongyang's military gains. By the end of the year, the UN cut this cap down even further to just 500,000 barrels a year. By allowing North Korean tankers like Yuson to fill to the brim with oil and ship it directly back home, Russia is now openly breaking the sanctions it helped to impose. The Kremlin is also widely suspected of transferring technology to fuel Kim Jong Un's quest for military supremacy. These are pre- and post-launch images of North Korea's KN-23 short-range ballistic missile, also known as the Hwasong-11A. This is the same missile we saw earlier, lying in a Ukrainian street in January 2024. These are pre- and post-launch images of Russia's Iskander-M ballistic missile. It doesn't take a military expert to see that they are almost identical in terms of their visual characteristics. But the comparison doesn't stop there. Both missiles are road mobile, solid-fueled, surface-to-surface weapons. They are also a close match in terms of their dimensions and capabilities. The Iskander is a weapon of true terror. It is known as a quasi-ballistic missile. In the middle of its flight, it will reach a speed of Mach 3, that's 3 times the speed of sound, and accelerate to greater than Mach 5 as it descends towards a target. It carries 400 kilos of high explosives or cluster munitions. It is truly one of the most capable short-range ballistic missiles on Earth. There is some debate over the extent to which Russia helped North Korea to design the KN-23, but the comparison speaks for itself. Other transfers of technology are undeniable. For example, when Kim Jong Un visited Russia's Far East in September 2023, cameras caught this motorcade leaving Vladivostok with a pickup truck, carrying what looked like Goran-2 kamikaze drones. These devices, based on the Iranian Shahed 136, which you can see here, are cheap but highly effective and have been used en masse to pound targets across Ukraine. They're designed to fly in long, circuitous routes, confusing Ukrainian air defences and complicating their tasks. They carry up to 50 kilos of high explosives or other warheads that are designed to deliberately damage power infrastructure. They're not particularly advanced or difficult to manufacture, and Russia is believed to produce thousands of them every month. Reports later confirmed that Moscow had gifted Kim 5 attack drones, plus a G-25 vertical takeoff reconnaissance drone. These will have been scrutinized and reversed engineered by North Korean scientists, in much the same way that Russia has reversed engineered the same technology from Iran. Altogether, these transfers show that Russia is not just supplying fuel, but supercharging North Korea's defense industry.
To facilitate these ongoing exchanges, both sides have committed to building new infrastructure projects. One of many ventures agreed during Putin's trip to Pyongyang in 2024 was the construction of the first ever road bridge linking Russia to North Korea over the Tyumen River. The pair already share a key rail link here, cutely referred to as the Most Druzhby, or Friendship Bridge. Now, this is primarily used for trade, but also recently started hosting a bi-monthly passenger train service between Moscow and Pyongyang. However, the new road connection, expected to cost some $115 million, will enable a constant flow of traffic between the two states. This directive, issued on February 1st, 2025, by Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, decreed the bridge must be completed no later than the 31st of December 2026. It also named Tunnel Yuzhstroy as the sole Russian contractor for the project. This immediately raised suspicion of rampant corruption and embezzlement. That's because Tunnel Yuzhstroy is widely believed to be a front company for BTS Most, a gigantic infrastructure developer controlled by oligarch Ruslan Baysarov, a close associate of the Kremlin-backed strongman of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov. But these guys will be expected to deliver. Now, construction is already well underway. This sat image from April 2025 shows foundations being laid at the site. By August, fresh images showed significant progress on the project. Now though, the Russian government wants to move its deadline for completion from December 2026 up to June, to coincide with a 2-year anniversary of Putin's historic state visit to North Korea in 2024. None of the collaboration we've examined here today could take place without constant communication between Russia and North Korea at the highest level. This is another image from Putin's visit to North Korea, officially known as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK, on June 19, 2024. Here, Putin and Kim are seen being greeted by a group of children waving Russian and North Korean flags as they parade around the center of Pyongyang. But take a look at the background. The square is adorned with towering portraits of Putin, and the Russian tricolor is as ubiquitous as the flag of the DPRK, a clear expression of warmth and reverence. This is because Moscow and Pyongyang's relations go far beyond mutually beneficial transactions of arms, tech, and energy. Their ties are now rooted in a broader political and ideological alignment, one that rejects the Western-led international order and is intent on developing influence independent of it. To explain how we got here, we need to travel back in time to the 1940s and the end of the Second World War. Japan had ruled over Korea since the early 1900s, but when the empire was defeated, the US and the Soviet Union split the Korean peninsula in two. The leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, wanted to ensure communist rule in the north. So, he instructed his secret police chief, Lavrentiy Beria, to recommend an opportunistic ideologue they could install as leader. Beria chose a young guerrilla fighter called Kim Il-sung, grandfather of Kim Jong Un, who became the first supreme leader of the DPRK. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, the Soviets propped up Kim's regime with funding, arms, and aid. But the historic relationship eventually broke down. That happened when the final leader of the USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev, wanted to recognize and trade with the economically and technologically superior South Korea. In 1990, a year before the USSR's collapse, North Korea's foreign minister famously accused the Soviet Union of discarding the DPRK like a pair of worn-out shoes. But when Vladimir Putin ascended to the presidency in Russia in the year 2000, he decided it was time to dig those shoes out again. He became the first leader, Russian or Soviet, to ever conduct a state visit to Pyongyang. These images show Putin being greeted by Kim Jong Un's father, Kim Jong-il, 25 years ago, albeit with a little less fanfare than in his more recent visit to North Korea. Although South Korea remained far more important to the Russian economy, Moscow still wanted to maintain a foothold on both sides of the Korean peninsula. Then came a turning point. When Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014 and stoked war in the eastern Donbass region, Kim Jong Un, still in the early years of his rule after his father's death, began shifting his rhetoric. In letters to the Kremlin and in public statements, he began to speak very fondly of the Russian people and Putin as leader. He also began hinting at the two countries' shared resistance to the West. But it was Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 that sparked a dramatic shift in the relationship. In July 2023, Russia's then Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, made a historic visit to North Korea to attend the celebrations commemorating the 70-year anniversary of the Korean War armistice. He was also treated to a tour of a North Korean military facility stuffed full of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Then in September, Kim Jong Un enjoyed a 6-day tour of Russia's Far East. As well as a customary visit to Vladivostok, Kim was also granted a tour of two highly sensitive locations: the Gagarin fighter jet manufacturing plant in Komsomolsk-na-Amur and the Vostochny Cosmodrome, Russia's new age spaceport. At the aircraft plant, you can see engineers working on the airframes of what looked like two of Russia's most advanced fighter jets, the 4.5 generation Sukhoi 35 and the 5th generation Su-57. Meanwhile, this picture shows Putin visiting Vostochny shortly after the invasion of Ukraine, standing beside a Soyuz 2.1A launch vehicle. The level of access afforded to the North Korean leader was shocking. This image shows Kim and some of his generals inspecting the prototype cockpit of a Su-57. Here, we see Kim and Putin standing before what appears to be the booster engine for the Angara A-5, Russia's most advanced rocket. And in this photo, you can see Kim, right here, peering over the edge of a state-of-the-art launch platform. It was no coincidence that 2 months later, in November 2023, Pyongyang announced it had completed its first successful launch of a spy satellite. This image, released by state news agency KCNA in November 2023, claims to show the launch, which South Korean intelligence said could not be possible without Russian technology and know-how. The transformation reached its peak the next summer, when Putin and Kim finally put pen to paper and sealed their comprehensive strategic partnership. The contents of this document offer a stark insight into what the future of the Russian and North Korean relationship might look like. In some ways, the partnership agreement simply formalizes the activities that Russia and North Korea were already engaged in. For example, Article 4 outlines a mutual defense clause, which says if either country is put in a state of war, the other shall provide military and other assistance with all means in its possession without delay. This wording is almost identical to the Cold War era treaty between the Soviet Union and the DPRK. Meanwhile, Articles 8, 9, and 10 outline a commitment to creating mechanisms for joint activities to strengthen defense capabilities, to jointly confront growing challenges and threats in areas of strategic importance, and to promote the expansion and development of cooperation in trade, economic, investment, scientific, and technical fields. But the treaty does far more than just account for what's already happening. It's a statement of intent, setting out exactly how Moscow and Pyongyang plan to challenge and erode what they see as the US and the West's systems of control. The preamble to the treaty makes that point in no uncertain terms. It pledges to protect international justice from hegemonic aspirations and attempts to impose a unipolar world order. It also pledges to counteract any challenges that threaten the existence of humanity. This language is aimed squarely at Washington, painting the US as a dominating power and the Russo-Korean partnership as the spearhead of resistance. Article 7 of the treaty then commits Russia and North Korea to consult and cooperate within the framework of international organizations, including the UN, and to mutually support the membership of each party in relevant international and regional organizations. Article 16 goes further still, laying out in great detail how both countries will act to protect one another from sanctions. It declares that the parties will oppose the use of unilateral coercive measures and consider their introduction illegal. The treaty also pledges that the parties shall make practical efforts to reduce the risks of these measures, eliminate or minimize their direct and indirect impact. We've already seen a clear example of how this plays out in practice. Last year, Russia used its power as a permanent member of the UN Security Council to veto a resolution to extend the monitoring of North Korean sanctions violations. Here is Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia. In other words, Moscow has moved from quietly breaking sanctions to actively dismantling the system that enforces them. Last but not least, Article 23 of the treaty signifies Russia and North Korea's long-term commitment to one another. The text stipulates that this agreement is valid for an indefinite period, and that it can only be terminated with 1 year's written notice. Yours faithfully, Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un. Joseph Stalin officially installed Kim Il-sung and helped to found the DPRK in 1948. Now, almost 80 years later, Putin and Kim have set the stage for a new era of Russia and North Korean cooperation, but this time as partners united by one common adversary. As the guns continue to thunder in Ukraine and Kim doubles down on ruthless militarization, it is now up to the United States and her allies to face this perilous new threat.